words of Terry Pratchett that truly the only thing known to travel faster than ordinary light is indeed monarchy. But regardless of our views on monarchy, the Queen is respected for her remarkable dignity with which she held herself throughout trying times, and we appreciate the twinkle in her eye, her humour, her love of animals, and the humility with which she held far from humble office. She was the first Queen Elizabeth in Scotland, of course, with lineage stretching back to the Stuart dynasty and Mary Queen of Scots. And in Scotland, hosting barbecues in the hills of Balmoral, it said that was where she was happiest. Older generations will fondly remember the royal tour of Midlothian back in 1961, where she was out and about across the county, viewing aspects of everyday life and visiting in Roslin Chapel or the rural housing schemes at Temple, the carpet factory in Bonnyrigg and to the Lonehead Memorial Park. There was no standing room left in the streets of Dalkeith at this time, with crowds climbing on the roof of the bus station. Come back to Midlothian for the reopening of the Borders Railway, unveiling a plaque at the station in Newton Grange, where she was welcomed with a wonderful performance by the Newton Grange Silver Band, who expressed their condolences at this time. People from all walks of life in Midlothian wish to convey their respects and make it clear just how fondly the Queen is remembered. Condolences have been expressed online by community groups across Midlothian, in addition to Midlothian's Lord Lieutenant and Provost, who have already held local tributes, and in line with many other places have opened a book of condolence across council venues in Midlothian to allow people to pay their own tributes. And Mr Deputy Speaker, as a previous member and the current chair of the All-Party Group for the Boys Brigade, I've always been keenly aware of Her Majesty's role as the organisation's patron, and know that all in the Boys Brigade world wish to pass on their thoughts and prayers of the entire Boys Brigade family at this time. We're all now getting our heads round the changes that this will make to the basic things that we all took for granted. The ground has shifted beneath our feet, and the lads at my local post office in Lonehead said, "Every day we send hundreds of letters and parcels bearing the Queen's head, and this will now be no more. May she rest in peace."
Andrew Morrison.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I rise with the deep and profound condolences of my constituents in South West Wiltshire. A good and gracious lady has been taken from us, and we're all the poorer for that. A lady who has shaped the contours of our national life for 70 years has gone, but her legacy endures. And if you doubt that, just see the pictures of His Majesty in the hour of his grief, greeting the crowds that have gathered outside Buckingham Palace today. Mr Deputy Speaker, grown men don't cry, do they? Well, they do. And I've cried twice in my adult life, once when my father died, and once last night, for a woman that I had only met once at the aforementioned gin and tonic opportunity that a number of right honourable members have cited today. But unfortunately, in my case, there was no gin and tonic. And the reason it is so profound for most of us is for most of our lives, all of our lives, she has been a constant, somebody who has always been there, a rock, a stable place, someone to look to and to admire. And like many colleagues around the House today, when I go to primary schools, I'm asked two questions usually, one more difficult to answer than the other. Have you met the Queen, and how much are you paid? Last night I called my mother because I knew she'd be upset, and she was. In June 1953, she, like many of her generation, lined the streets of London to watch another young woman go to her coronation. That was a profound moment for her and an extraordinary moment in the life of our nation. And very soon we will do something again under altogether more sombre circumstances. But her sense of profound loss is certainly replicated right across this land and by people of all generations. And if I can say particularly, since I remain a member of His Majesty's Armed Forces, by the armed forces of this country who have lost their Commander-in-Chief, many of whom live in the towns and villages around Salisbury Plain that I have the honour and privilege to represent. Now, in 878, Alfred the Great secured the future of what became Wessex and ultimately the nation-state we know today. The Great is a descriptor that should not be used lightly. Queen Elizabeth II is the benchmark for monarchs in this age and ages past. She is Elizabeth the Great. As the Elizabethan age closes and the Caroline era dawns, we have to understand that it will look and feel different. We will look and feel different. But difference will bring renewal, and it will bring opportunity, as His Majesty has demonstrated today. Rest well, Your Majesty. God save the King.
Chris Elmore.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. It is a privilege to offer the condolences of my constituents to His Majesty the King and indeed to all members of the royal family. My constituency is privileged to be able to thank Her late Majesty and indeed, at the time, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, now of course the King, for securing SONI being developed in my constituency. As the Managing Director of SONI UK told me today, thousands of my constituents have benefited from the direct intervention of Her Majesty and indeed now His Majesty. The site was opened by the late Queen in 1993, and it was in fact the King in 1974 on a visit to Japan who said to the then Chief Executive of SONI, if you consider putting something in the UK, please put something in my country, Wales. I think of Her late Majesty in the forms of fun and friendship, and just like the member for South West Wiltshire, I'm frequently asked whenever I go to a school visit, be they teenagers or primary schools, have you ever met the Queen? To which the answer is, sort of. I've seen her. I've been at the box in the Lords for the Queen's speech. I once was asked, following the question, have you ever touched the Queen? I'm not sure who was more shocked, me or the head teacher, who genuinely looked like he was about to faint. The Queen had a healthy obsession with trees. And I can recall fondly the talks that she held with Sir David Attenborough that has been running on clips over the last few days about the Queen's canopy and the work that he was doing to talk about delivering this right across our United Kingdom. And she joked that we, her and Sir David, would not see that tree come to its 50-year life. They both laughed. And it's her humility that so many of us will think of so fondly. I have had the privilege, Mr Deputy Speaker, in my brief time in this House to have met now King Charles III twice. The first 5 days after I was elected in a by-election in 2016. I was lined up by the Secretary to the Lord Lieutenant and told, just stand there, Mr Elmore, he'll be along shortly. When he arrived, he came out the car, I was the second person to greet him, to which he said to me, you're the new one. And he said, and I was quite nervous, yes, Your Royal Highness. I wouldn't worry about it, I'm terribly nice. And I think that common touch is what he has picked up from the late Queen. And I know he will go on to serve this country well, to serve the Commonwealth well. God bless and keep the Queen and all who mourn her, and God save the King.
I'd like to thank Chris Elmore for keeping well within the 3-minute limit. So please, could people look at their contributions, keep them as short as you can, because we want to get as many in as we possibly can. Esther McVeigh.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. There has been so many wonderful, moving tributes today. It's been a real pleasure to be in the chamber to listen to them all. And with your permission, Mr Deputy Speaker, I will make my tribute through the eyes of the school children of Tatton. For as so many MPs have mentioned here today, the curiosity those children have of the late Queen Elizabeth II. And the question they do ask, particularly in primary school and junior school, is, have you met the Queen? And when I say yes, there are literally squeals of delight, gasps of disbelief, uncontainable excitement ripple through the class. Such was the impact that this lady had on all the people of this country, of all ages and of all parts. of the country. She loved children, and children loved her. And the clatter of questions that followed. Were you nervous when you met her? How was she? What's she like? Where did you meet her? So I try and describe the Queen to them as they sit and listen, eyes wide open. Well, I say she's diminutive, or she was diminutive, yet she was imposing. She was gentle, yet steely, and that powder puff grey hair, she was radiant and she shone. But it was her eyes that were remarkable and memorable. They were penetrating and bottomless, the knowledge behind them limitless. You can almost feel what she had seen and what she had experienced. You were in the presence of wisdom, and they are kind too. She was a curious blend, quite disarming, and yet incredibly caring. And was I nervous? Without doubt. You're in the presence of greatness, whose life has spanned war and peace. And that nervousness is amplified by the royal protocol, which she lives through and by. So when you're made a Privy Councillor and you've got steps to take, kneels to bow, it's meticulous choreography, the timing, quick steps, kneels, precision of words, and taking oaths. And the seal of office too at Sandringham. It was magical. It was a whirl of rooms and doors opening. It was brevity, but intensity. And as we left, we were all handed a packed lunch. And all I could say, it was thoughtful but simple, no frills. I think it was nutritionally balanced. There was no, there was no fuss whatsoever. It was all bother and nonsense. And as Deputy Chief Whip, I was also Treasurer to Her Majesty's household. But what she did love, and where I met her and spent more time with her, was at Windsor Castle with her horses in her stables, which she absolutely loved. And she confided that one of her best memories was the day that Estimate won the Ascot Gold Cup at Royal Ascot, trained by Sir Michael Stout. And she spoke to her trainers without fail every week, Nicky Henderson and John Gosden. But that was what she loved. So I'm absolutely delighted that the St. Leger is going ahead this weekend, not least because the Queen won the St. Leger in her Silver Jubilee year, with Dunfermline ridden by Willie Carson, one of her favourite jockeys. But kind and finally thoughtful. And my final conversation with her, she questioned social media and the impact it had, and she said, could anybody these days keep a secret? She talked about Operation Mincemeat, the deception that fooled Hitler and helped us win the war. And she said, can people keep things to themselves, or do they feel that they'd sooner tell everybody and maybe spoil what should be done? So when I leave children, I say, have you got discretion? Can you keep a secret? Are you selfless? Can you think of the greater good more than you can think of yourself? And if you can, then the Queen has done her job, and her spirit and her qualities will live on in all of us. God bless the Queen. God save the King.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady from Tatton. Queen Elizabeth was just 10 years old when her uncle abdicated, and she became heir to the throne. She was just 13 when war broke out, and in the 6 years that followed, we saw the pattern of her whole life to come. Standing with her people in those dark hours, at home and across the Commonwealth, sharing in their grief when her own uncle fell in service, leading our national celebrations when victory and freedom was finally secured, and throughout the war, setting the perfect example by rolling her sleeves up and doing her bit for the collective effort. Yet while the Second World War inspired millions to incredible feats and brought out the very best in our country, what we saw in those years from the young Princess Elizabeth was what we would come to understand as her normal. For the next 7 decades, she continued to set the perfect example of dedicated, selfless, timeless service and embody the values that unite our people. She continued to share our grief when tragedy struck the nation, whether it was Aberfan or Dunblane or 7/7, when so many people in Islington were killed. And she didn't buckle when it touched her own family. She continued to stand with us in our darkest and most fearful hours, and more so when she gave those messages of hope and courage that inspired all of us at the start of the pandemic. And she continued to lead our national celebrations right up to the point in recent years when the biggest, most united celebrations of all were to mark her own birthdays and jubilees. She did all that for us. She lived her life for us. And while she may have visited 200 hospitals or 2,000 schools, she may have cut 5,000 ribbons, awarded 20,000 medals, shaken the hands of hundreds of thousands, she never forgot for one moment that while on those were daily duties, were nothing out of the ordinary for her. They were deeply special for everyone that she met, and that she ensured that each of those individuals would go away with a unique memory of what she had said to them, how she had smiled at them, and the interest that she took in their service to the country, which is for so many people, those encounters with the Queen will be remembered as the greatest moments in their lives. And I know that in Islington there are at this moment lists being compiled of the visits that she made to our borough and stories being shared of the many times that we had the opportunity to see her and to experience a meeting with her. And so we join today to thank the Queen for 9 decades of devoted service, every one of them filled with setting the right example, filled with giving her people courage, sympathy and joy, filled with making others feel special, and doing it all day after day, year after year, right up until the very end. That record of duty would be unfathomable, astonishing, and worthy of celebration in this house, even if she had been a humble librarian or a long-serving charity volunteer. But to do all that in the pressure of her roles as heir to the throne and head of state places her public service on a pinnacle which is unmatched in the history of our country, and the like of which we will never see again. On behalf of the Honourable Artillery Company, the Charterhouse, Farringdon Crossrail, with all of whom she shared a particularly strong links, and on behalf of the people of Islington South and Finsbury, who loved her so dearly, I thank you, ma'am. God save the King.
Yeah. Stuart Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it is with sadness that I offer my tribute to Her late Majesty the Queen on my behalf and of course on behalf of the people of Pudsey, Horsforth and Aireborough. I suppose the first time the Queen came into my consciousness was as a small boy standing outside the house waiting for some lady in a big posh car to go past as she marked her Silver Jubilee in 1977. And from then on, there were many occasions where we would enjoy royal occasions. Those jubilees, the royal weddings, all helped us to enjoy street parties on our estate. And I thought about those street parties when the Queen's 90th birthday was coming and thought, I haven't seen one in our community for some time. And so we decided, a group of friends of ours, to organise one, and we were staggered when thousands of people in the community came out to celebrate Her Majesty's 90th birthday. And we saw it also reflected in the Mall just recently in the Jubilee, where literally hundreds of thousands turned up. And why? Well, because they respected and they loved her. Because they recognised that this was a woman of great dedication and who wanted to serve her country in the best way that she could, and that she would work to the very last day, as she committed to do all those many years ago. And last night, a couple of us went up to the palace, and again, people were there, meeting, strangers talking, all sharing conversations and memories about the late Her Majesty the Queen. The British public showing how much they loved her. And then she was there when we needed her most. Many have talked about the pandemics, but also when our country has had those awful terrorist attacks. And she has always given warm words comfort to those victims and to their families. And we will remember that amazing speech she made in the hospital in London, where she said that they will not change our way of life. I don't know about anybody else, but whenever I visit a constituent who's celebrating their 100th birthday, the card from Her Majesty the Queen is front and centre in the living room, because of course, why wouldn't they do it? It's such a proud thing for them to have. And many have also mentioned about school children asking, have you met the Queen? And for many years in this place, I was unable to say that I had, until I was honoured to be appointed as the Vice-Chamberlain of the household. And I remember my moment when I was being introduced to her, waiting for these doors to open. And when they finally did, realising that I actually had become that little boy again, standing there with my knees knocking and wondering how I might address Her Majesty. But as others have said, she put me at ease and she made me feel incredibly welcome. And as the Vice-Chamberlain, I also had to write the daily reports from this place, just to say that she liked the gossip, I understand, is heartwarming. But also, as Vice-Chamberlain, I was hostage. So I was taken hostage up there while she came here to open Parliament, and I was offered a drink, and they said, would you like tea or coffee? And one of them looked at me and thought, you look more like a champagne man. I said, well, I'm never going to do this again, so why not? Well, it was a big bottle of champagne, and I had a good time. A couple of months later, we had the general election, and I had to do it again. And as Her Majesty was leaving Buckingham Palace, she turned to me and she said, and you have a good time again, won't you? To conclude, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that during the awful attacks of 9/11, the Queen said to the people of America, grief is the price we pay for love. Well, we all loved her, and that is why we are grieving. And we send our thoughts and best wishes to His Majesty the King and his family, and we say, God save the King.
So say, please look again at your contributions so that they are sticking to the 3 minutes. Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to you for the opportunity to try and articulate the very keen and profound sense of loss that there is felt across the Northern Isles today. Her Majesty made a number of visits to Orkney and to Shetland over the years of her reign, all of which built a real connection between Orcadians and Shetlanders and their monarch. One of the best remembered is in 1960 when she took the Royal Yacht Britannia into Stronsay and into Stronsay and Westray in Orkney. Prince Philip was given the job of driving her around Westray in their then most suitable available vehicle, the new 12-seater school bus. It produced one of the best pictures of Her Majesty that I think any of us will ever see. She is sitting in the passenger seat, laughing uproariously, while Prince Philip is in the driver's seat, shall we just say, with a look of grim determination on his face. I don't know what it was exactly that caused that look of grim determination, but having been there myself with my wife on occasions, I can only guess. Her Majesty also visited Shetland in 1981, as Shetland's oil came on stream through the Sullomvo terminal, and she opened the terminal then. That was remembered in Shetland, unfortunately, because it was a day when the IRA detonated a bomb in Shetland in the power station there. I mention that because while we all speak about her quite remarkable record of service, we should not forget that that service was one which often came at personal risk. Like others, I had my moments meeting Her Majesty, which I treasure as very private and special moments. I served as controller of the household from 2010 to 2013, and as such had a walk-on part in the state opening of Parliament. It's fair to say, in 2013, we had the misfortune of a state opening of Parliament which clashed with the first day of the Windsor Horse Show. And when we returned to Buckingham Palace at the end of the state opening, we were left in no doubt that should this unfortunate diary mismanagement happen in the future, it would not necessarily be the Windsor Horse Show that would lose out on that occasion. Mr Deputy Speaker, I think back to the very first time I saw Her Majesty in the flesh, and it was when she visited Ireland, where I was growing up in 1977 as part of her Silver Jubilee tour. She often visited Ireland privately as a guest of the Morrison family. And in passing, I would like to pay tribute not just to Her Majesty, but also to the Honourable Mary Morrison, who served for many, many years as one of Her Majesty's ladies in waiting. At that occasion, she visited Bowmore Distillery. That was the first time she had visited a distillery, and it came back to me in 2014 when I was present as Secretary of State for Scotland at the naming of the aircraft carrier HMS Queen Elizabeth. On that occasion, as the aircraft carrier was named, there was a bottle of Bowmore whisky smashed on the side of the boat, and the smell of that malt whisky drifted across Rosyth, and it took me back to that day in 1977. I mention that because I think, like so many people, these are the threads that Her Majesty interwove throughout our lives that enrich the fabric of our country. That is why we miss her, and that is why we now pledge our new allegiance to His Majesty the King. God save the King.
Yeah. Pritchard.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I rise to pay my own personal tribute to the late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, and on behalf of all my constituents throughout the Wrekin constituency. And Queen Elizabeth visited Shropshire many times over her long reign. In particular, her visits to the Wrekin are still remembered with abiding fondness and deep affection. Her visit to Wrekin College in 1967, her visit to the 13th century Buttercross in Newport in 1981, her visit to Donington during the Falklands War in 1982, and passing through High Arkle and other nearby villages, and her last visit to the Wrekin in 2012 to RAF Cosford as part of her Diamond Jubilee pageant, where a huge crowd of over 35,000 people turned out to greet her. The late Queen Elizabeth was the personification of duty, integrity, selflessness, steadfastness, and resoluteness, and always with a superb sense of humour, observation, and wit. Yes, born out of her own decency and exemplary character, but also born out of her deep and abiding Christian faith, something she quietly attested to throughout her long reign, and so often heard through her comforting and unifying Christmas Day messages, which we will all miss. Mr Deputy Speaker, the Wrekin loved the Queen, Shropshire loved the Queen. She will abide in all our hearts and memories. May she rest in peace and rise in glory. Long live the King.
Marsha de Cordova.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's an honour to not only speak on my own behalf, but also on the behalf of my constituents in Battersea, and also pass on their condolences. The passing of Her Majesty the Queen is a great loss for the royal family and for our country. Our remarkable Queen dedicated 70 years of our life serving our country as our longest reigning sovereign, and devoted her life to the betterment of this country. And today we celebrate her service and express our thanks for her steadfast leadership. The Queen was a role model and someone who touched the lives of so many in her own unique and distinguished way. Now, over the course of her reign, there was great transformation and progress in the world, yet she served as that constant and reassuring figure during periods of change that provided us all with a sense of security. The Queen was incredibly resolute and principled, and she had a work ethic and commitment to the duty and service which she placed above all other considerations. And we can say even in her 90s and the days before her death, she was still working and serving our country. Now, her strong and abiding faith in God was the golden thread that guided her work and her commitment to respecting everybody and appreciating difference and serving people. Now, across Battersea, people will be reflecting on her selfless service and leadership of our country. And the Queen visited the constituency on many occasions, including the then children's home on the Winstanley estate and, of course, Battersea Dogs and Cats Home. We all know how passionate she was about animals and their welfare, and this was shown by her patronage of the home. And as they have already said this week, that they were so lucky to have had such a valuable relationship with her. She wasn't just our Queen, as she was seen globally by all the contributions and tributes that have come her way. Now, as I close, my thoughts and prayers are with His Royal Highness King Charles and the royal family. May she rest in peace and rise in eternal glory. God save the King.
Yeah. Greg Hans.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I rise to add my tribute to Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II on behalf of my Chelsea and Fulham constituents at a time of great sadness for the whole country. She was much loved in the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, and as much so amongst my Fulham constituents as well. She came at least once a year to my constituency, to the Chelsea Flower Show. Indeed, the first time and the last time that I personally met her was at the Chelsea Flower Show in 2010, and then this year, just 3 months ago. The Chelsea Flower Show was one of her absolute favourite events. She rarely, if ever, missed it. She may have been to it more than 70 times. But in 2010, it was my first Chelsea Flower Show, and I was third in the royal receiving line, and I was exceptionally nervous. This wasn't helped by the receiving line taking around 2 hours, as almost the entire royal family comes at 10-minute intervals. Started with Princess Alexandra, I think, and eventually the Queen arrived, and all passed well. I had bowed in the right place and extended her my hand at the right time. We had a brief, charming and pleasant conversation. I could relax, except I had forgotten one thing. She wasn't the last of the royal family to come. There was still the Duke of Edinburgh moments after. And I realised my mistake, and I almost fell over, having messed up my bow, called him Your Majesty, to which the Duke smiled and said, "Are you new?" And I pay tribute to him today, to the late Duke of Edinburgh as well, the Queen's beloved husband. And the last time I saw her was at this year's Chelsea Flower Show, which she toured with great enthusiasm at age 96 in a golf cart. She was radiant and, as ever, fascinated by the displays, and it was simply amazing to see her at the age of 96. She was much loved by my Fulham constituents as well. Indeed, one of the iconic pieces of video footage from the 1977 Silver Jubilee was a clip of a group of women on Kingwood Road in Fulham, arm in Jubilee hats, singing all together, "Maybe It's Because I'm a Londoner." She will be grieved and warmly remembered the length of the King's Road, and as appropriately along the new King's Road as well. I also met her, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in my role as the government's Deputy Chief Whip. Many in this House will know that the Deputy Chief Whip is also the honorific treasurer of the royal household. And the role comes with a wand of office, which looks like a long billiard cue, which unscrews in the middle, referred to earlier by my right honourable friend, the member for Pendle. The day came in October 2013 for the transfer of the wand of office from my predecessor, Sir John Randall, now Lord Randall, to me in a ceremony at the Palace. I was once again nervous. Once again, it all started well. Sir John handed the Queen the wand of office. She handed then to me the wand of office. But I started fidgeting with this wand of office. I found it a fascinating article as Sir John carried on speaking with Her Majesty. And I started absent-mindedly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, unscrewing the wand of office. I had an alarmed look from Her Majesty and an alarmed look from Sir John Randall, who told me, stop it. And I was told afterwards, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that if I had unscrewed entirely the wand of office, it would have meant rejecting the office, and it would have meant that Sir John would have had to come back here, still as the government's Deputy Chief Whip. But that wasn't the worst. A minute or two later, the Queen suddenly said to me and Sir John, bear in mind this was in 2013, at around the time of growing European rebellion in the Conservative Party, the Queen suddenly said, I do think Mr. Barron has a point, with reference to my honourable friend, the member for Billericay. By now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I was a total wreck. The Queen was seemingly pronouncing on the greatest political issue of the time, and I had to give her an answer on behalf of the government. But fortunately, she saw my difficulty and clarified it was with reference to one of the honourable gentlemen, the member for Billericay's many other rebellions. Reference to regimental mergers, nothing to do with Brexit at all. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I conclude by just saying I think the Queen's historic significance, the length of her reign, everything that she's seen, in fact she's met every US president except one, the fact that her first Prime Minister was Sir Winston Churchill, born more than 100 years before my right honourable friend, the member for South West Norfolk, the fact that Joseph Stalin was still in the Kremlin at the time that she came to the throne shows her historical significance. I pay tribute on behalf of my constituents of Chelsea and Fulham and wish many, many years of a happy reign to King Charles III.
I know many people have got great stories and we do want to hear them, but I have to say that if we have multiple stories and it goes on, then there are a lot of people who are just simply going to be disappointed even at 10 o'clock tonight. So please be mindful of your colleagues. Jonathan Ashworth.
Grateful, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I rise to express my personal condolences to His Majesty the King and the Royal Family, to associate myself with the remarks that we have heard in the debate so far, and to express on behalf of my constituents in Leicester South and the City of Leicester our tribute to Her Majesty, the late Majesty. Leicester is proud of its radical tradition, but notwithstanding our history as a parliamentarian stronghold, across Leicester, Her Majesty was held in deep affection, with deep reverence and deep love, and we are united in our grief today. Leicester's story today is one of diversity. We have welcomed families from across the globe, from across the Commonwealth, to our city. Sometimes families who were fleeing persecution with nothing but a hastily packed suitcase. And Her Majesty's leadership of the Commonwealth not only stands as a reminder of the bonds of solidarity between the different nations of the Commonwealth, but it is also stands as a symbol of inspirational hope for families who were fleeing persecution, hope for a better future for themselves and their children, something that we have been reminded of recently in Leicester just last month, as we recalled the 50-year anniversary of the expulsion of the Asian community from Uganda. And Her Majesty herself celebrated our diversity in Leicester also. She was proud of our different faith groups, and today in Leicester, if I may say so, our mosques at Jummah prayers have been recognising Her Majesty's death and expressing their thanks. Our Hindu temples have been placing garlands over pictures of Her Majesty's. There are prayers in our synagogues, our gurdwaras, our Jain temples. And we were particularly proud 10 years ago to host Her Majesty for the start of her Diamond Jubilee tour in Leicester, and all of our communities came together. Indeed, for the start of that Diamond Jubilee tour, my honourable friend from Leicester West, we had the privilege of welcoming her to De Montfort University in my constituency for the start of that tour. And as we were queuing up to greet Her Majesty and His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh, and we were waiting nervously, and I think I caught, just in the corner of my eye, Her Majesty looking somewhat bemused, if not slightly askance, at her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, who had asked me and the member for Leicester West whether we were Reds or Blues. I don't know what his opinion was of our answer, frankly. But not only did we celebrate Her Majesty for the start of the Diamond Jubilee tour, a few months later, we were nervous in Leicester, because it was a few months later that we discovered the remains of the last Yorkist monarch in a Leicester City Council car park. This provoked all kinds of knotty constitutional questions for the palace today and what we were going to do with Richard III. But Her Majesty, with the usual aplomb and diplomatic skill that we've heard so much of, let it be known that she was following developments with great interest, and a couple of years later visited Leicester Cathedral, the final resting place of Richard III, to hand out Maundy money on Maundy Thursday. Let me finish with this point, Mr. Deputy Speaker. In February 1952, when this House debated a motion on the loss of His Majesty, King George, Winston Churchill from the dispatch box said he hoped that the accession of Queen Elizabeth would usher in a golden age. In response, the former Prime Minister and then Leader of the Opposition, Clement Attlee, said that he hoped the accession of Queen Elizabeth would lead to another glorious Elizabethan era, more renowned than the first one. My God, she more than surpassed the aspirations and hopes of those two great Prime Ministers. Rest in peace, and God save the King.
I know everybody's keen to get in as well, so they're again look at the time limits, but please don't approach the chair either. I mean, every time I choose somebody, it means I'm not choosing everybody else. And I know there's a lot of pressure, and I know you all want to get in. So Gary Streeter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it's a privilege to bring a tribute to our late Queen on behalf not just of myself, but of course my constituents in South West Devon. And I want to focus in on her excellent Christmas broadcasts every year, which have been mentioned by some colleagues. Her ability to connect with the whole nation was never better expressed than through her Christmas Day broadcasts. In our household, as in many others, they were unmissable events, and in recent years the whole day was shaped around them. And each year, as we know, she spoke with great warmth and insight about the events of the year with ever more personal reflections. And she never shirked from touching on painful events, not just the positive, knowing that all of our lives are made up with ups and downs. And in particular, she used those opportunities to remind the nation of the true meaning of Christmas, namely the birth of her Saviour, our Saviour, Jesus Christ. On the 3rd of August this very year, she said this: "Throughout my life, the message and teachings of Christ have been my guide, and in them I find hope." It was, Mr. Deputy Speaker, a simple but clear explanation of the influences that had shaped her life. And in our celebration of her greatness as a monarch, she would not want us also to, she would want us to recognise the significance of the gospel message that produced such fruit in her. If she was the rock on which modern Britain was built, it was because she stood on the true rock, the Rock of Ages. And in our pluralistic society, containing citizens of all faiths and none, her declaration of Christian faith never jarred nor grated or alienated, as we heard from the Honourable Lady from Birmingham, Ladywood, because it was authentic. And this was demonstrated through her magnificent Christmas broadcasts. But I believe, in my final point, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I believe it is also possible to discern in her broadcasts another deep quality that she possessed. That even in her 80s and in her 90s, she did not stand still or remain static. She was moving forward, learning, developing year on year. She became more intimate with her subjects during those broadcasts, more personal, ever more bold. She had an appetite for progress and advancement to the very end. So an authentic life shaped by her sincere faith that produced in all the vicissitudes of life a remarkable woman and a great monarch. On behalf of the people of South West Devon, thank you, Your Majesty, for your life of service on our behalf. May you rest in peace and rise in glory.
Steve Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We've heard some really wonderful anecdotes and stories this afternoon of members' meetings with Her late Majesty the Queen. But for most people who met her, those moments would have been more fleeting. But they lodge in the memory because of the huge importance the Queen has played in our life as a nation and our sense of who we are. I first saw her as a schoolboy during the Silver Jubilee walkabout in Windsor, feeling so excited, as so many other children will have done over the years, simply to snatch a photograph of her with my little plastic camera. It would be an iPhone today, of course. Another was when she came to open the Lambeth Academy in Clapham. The students were beside themselves with excitement that the Queen had come to visit their school. And it's these little moments like these, through these little moments, that the Queen has been a constant presence who lit up our lives for as long as most of us have been alive. The stability of her presence eased our country through periods of drastic change as Britain moved from being the centre of an empire to becoming the modern, diverse and more inclusive country that we know and love today. She really was, in T.S. Eliot's words, the still point of the turning world where past and future are gathered. My constituency of Croydon North is one of the country's most diverse. People who came there from the Commonwealth feel a special bond with Her late Majesty as a connection between their past and their future. Many others who arrived from outside the Commonwealth would consider their citizenship ceremonies, where they swore allegiance to Her Majesty, to be among the most important moments in their lives. During the Platinum Jubilee celebrations, we saw a great outpouring of love for Her late Majesty. In Croydon North, as elsewhere, our diverse communities came together to celebrate a woman who united us as a community and as a country in a way that nothing and no one else could do. Her loss will be felt keenly, and it will be felt personally. 3 months ago, my father died, and the next day a rainbow appeared over his house, and we took that as a sign that he was at peace. I take the rainbow that appeared over Windsor Castle in the same way, and as a sign that Her late Majesty has been taken into the arms of God and has found her eternal peace. On behalf of the people of Croydon North, I offer my deepest thanks to Her late Majesty for a lifetime of service, my condolences to the royal family on their loss, and my loyalty to our new King Charles III as he ascends the throne to meet his destiny and ours.
Mark Francois. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have lost our sovereign, the most remarkable woman, the longest reigning monarch in British history, who in 70 years barely ever put a foot wrong. She was perhaps the most famous person in the world, and possibly the most popular too. If the House will indulge me, it's almost a year since we lost our great friend Sir David Amess. I mention him because I think it's fair to say he was rather keen on the monarchy, and on Her Majesty the Queen in particular. I well remember how he was bursting with pride when the Queen knighted him with an investiture at Windsor. He subsequently told our local paper, The Echo, who would ever have thought that a boy from the East End of London would one day be knighted by a queen in a castle. If he were here today, he would pay the most fulsome tribute to Her Majesty, so perhaps I could do that for him in lieu. From my own perspective, I also had the immense privilege of serving Her Majesty as Vice-Chamberlain when I served in the Coalition Whip's office from 2010 to 12. It's an ancient office, but it essentially has three modern functions. Firstly, to act as the Queen's messenger to Parliament, and on the first occasion I had an audience with her, I was completely terrified. I think it's to the Queen's credit she well understood that people who met her, especially for the first time, were extremely nervous, and she had that most wonderful manner in asking you one or two extremely gentle questions, which even a Member of Parliament couldn't get wrong, to settle nerves. It was a wonderful skill with people, which I think was but one of the reasons why her subjects loved her so much. Secondly, each evening when